promote anyone to a speaker. There you go.
It's already recording. Okay.
So we're now live. And hello to the Zoom user who is 5 minutes early. This is the opposite of the session we had last week where we went live about 10 minutes late because we had serious technical issues. So we're very
sorry about that. I just
no,
pressed
it's
the button
fine.
when it came up. Then I will share my screen already.
Yeah, like I say, so you're now in control, so you'll be able to promote people to panelist or speaker if they want to.
The thing is, I can't, because I'm full screen, I can't actually do that. I can't see any of the,
in that case,
I can't see anything else, sadly, than my screen and you in video.
I'll do that then. It's fine.
Okay, please do. I see that there's something on chat, but I can't see what it is.
Oh, it's the anonymous. Oh, I don't know who you are. You're just down as Zoom user, but don't worry about being early. You're just seeing the behind the scenes of what usually takes place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I will just wait till you tell me that more people are in the room and you want to start.
Yeah, we'll usually do. I'll wait for a few people, and then there's a little bit of like small admin that we need to run through. Not very much though, because it's our last session now.
This is the last session.
This is the last recorded session, and then we give people access to. We have quite a few sessions, and we give everyone access for our attendees to rejoin.
Okay, good.
Well, hi, Renette. And then we'll be everyone just has access to the recordings for a month or two after. So it's like a kind of mixed learning opportunity.
Great. This is very annoying on my screen. Actually, I need to try to move stuff. There we go. Now I can actually see what I'm reading.
Hi, Renette. Hey, Bola. I can see your name now. Yep, I know who it is. Welcome. Turn that off as well. So Heidi, you said you've got a hard stop at 1.
I do.
1. Okay, cool. That's fine.
I do, sadly. Yes, I have another meeting. It was my own mess up in terms of time zones. When you said 12 BST, I thought, is that 11 or 1? I was confused with Finland, the UK. Anyway, I have a call right after.
No, that's fine. What keeps confusing me is when does summertime end? So I keep just talking to people about booking things for summertime in December, and they're just like, I don't know what time you want or what you need from me right now.
Sure. Yeah, that happens to me as well. It's always when it's not the exact same time zone that there's a chance that I put it in my calendar for a long time. But anyway, it's all good.
Yeah. And also increasingly, we've been working more with the Diversity VC US team.
Okay.
And beyond Pacific and East Coast, I have absolutely no idea where any of the other cities fall and how the time zones work. So I'm just going to give you a time and you can figure it out for yourself.
Yeah.
Where in the world you are.
I'm with you. I feel like I use Mixmax for that, but I just send people meeting slots in my time zone and then they can select, because I feel like the nightmare of people say, can you meet this time, Central Time? And then I sit there and Google and try to, I was like, no.
Well, I tried that.
I'm not doing it anymore.
But then we set up a group, Diversity VC Calendly, but then it was Daisy, our COO, who set it up, and she's based in Berlin. And everyone's timings were then in Central European time automatically, and I didn't know how to change it, so I just kept booking things in when I was just absolutely not available because my time, it didn't help, so we just had to give up on that.
Fair enough. Yep, that's tricky. Maybe we should just remove time zones altogether. would be easier.
Got a few more joining now that we're on the hour. So hi there. Just joining the really fun time zone chat. So the most insightful.
Yeah, exactly. Feel free to send us tips on how to get better at this.
Yeah. What we really should have done by now, given that we're 3 cohorts in, is created some sort of like future VC elevator music for the opening session and just have like something running.
That's
while we
true.
wait.
Nice. I created, this is all the insights of a fund and how professional things actually are. When we set up our Zoom account, so we started a fund a year and a half ago, we set up a Zoom account. I made a waiting room for Pale Blue Dots. And then of course, I'm the only person who never is in the waiting room because it's my waiting room. So there was an old logo and there were some spelling mistakes in my kind of please wait first. And then once I logged in from my phone to my own call and I was like, oh my God, is this what everyone's been seeing for a year? Oh, yeah. That was, no one ever mentioned it to me.
Well,
That, hey, that's, you know, no, first of all, a really old, crappy looking logo, but also loads of spelling mistakes in the text about waiting. Anyway, it happens.
You're having some very polite meetings then. Meetings with very polite people.
Yeah, I mean, they just assume we can't spell, which is fine. You know,
or they can't spell. You never know.
Either. I just feel like everyone must have been a bit like, that's strange. But then, you know, by the time they meet you, they're like, I don't want to be rude. I just feel like someone that I know should have said, do you know that your waiting room is messed up? But yeah, anyway, fixed now.
Well, we just had someone external just emailed a week ago to say that our website, which has been up for over a year now, has a typo in it. And I was like, okay, great. Well, at least one person's pointed it out.
I'm sure of ours has so many typos as well.
I really appreciated them pointing it out there. I was like, thank you. She was really apologetic about it as well. I felt quite bad.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. It's lunchtime, so I'll give people 2 more minutes to jump in.
All right.
But in the meantime, people who are here, hi, welcome to this session. We are, well, this is our last topical session and our last main session. And Bola's met Heidi before. That's good. Couple of main bits of admin for this is recordings are going to be staying up for the next month, so you will have until the end of November to catch up on anything if you haven't. I think there have been a few recordings that should have been up and just haven't been accessible, so we're redoing all of that, and that should all be available next week, so we'll let you know when that's all up, and hopefully everyone should be able to access it. But you'll have a month basically to then catch up on everything that you've missed and take notes, and let us know if you've got any questions, or let the speakers know as well if you've got any questions about what's been covered. On the mentor front, I think I've emailed everyone individually about this who never got assigned a mentor to begin with. I think we mentioned we had to give priority to those who had signed up before the deadline. What we're doing is, because we have had a few people after the deadline who have still wanted to get access to a mentor, we're going to bring in a few people over the next month, and they'll just be able to chat you through the recordings. So if you haven't got a mentor yet, you should get one in the next month. It'll just be it'll kind of keep in touch with them and to go over the watching of the recordings of the assessments rather than of the webinars. the assessments is the other diversity VC project I've been working on. I've got all the words mixed up. But yeah, that's all going to be available to you for a while. And then once that month is over, we will be closing off the Notion, so you won't have access. So please do make use of that during the next month. We can't keep everything up together forever. There is some proprietary stuff in some of the recordings of sessions and recordings that we've mentioned. So please do make use of it while you can. I think that's it. We're going to be sending around a survey at the end of next month. So once you've had time to catch up on all of the sessions, which is going to be a repeat of the survey we sent at the very beginning, a kind of understanding of VC. So just keep an eye out for that as well. We're going to kind of keep you updated, but please do look out for that. I think it was Oliver who was asking about that particular setup. So that's going to be available. I think that is everything I have for now. As ever, Q&A is open, but we will be promoting people to, we will promote you to panelist if you want to ask, so let us know. Or just raise a hand and we can promote you up to a panelist and you can ask a question so that we can have a bit more of a discussion. I'm going to hand over to you then, Heidi.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, first of all, thanks so much for having me. Super happy to do this. And I prefer a bit of an interactive session. So please stop me if you have any questions, if there's anything that's unclear or you just want to know more about something. I will leave some time at the end as well, but I do have a hard stop and have to leave 2 o'clock my time. So I guess 1 o'clock your time if you're in the UK. So yeah, do feel free to ask as we go as well. So I'm going to get started. My name is Heidi Lindvall. I'm going to talk about ClimateTech, which is the ClimateTech VC that I run, and a little bit on how we work as well, and what is essentially different for us and different for our kind of ClimateTech fund. So I'm starting a little bit with my own story and how I actually got into VC. I have a very non-traditional VC background. Essentially, I started as a documentary filmmaker. I used to make documentaries on social and global issues. I started a company called Kodak, and I used to travel around the world making these documentaries. So I went to places like Sri Lanka, where they had a very long war, and was kind of among the first journalists. I wasn't really a real journalist. I was a 22-year-old student, but to kind of cover the aftermath of that civil war. Went to Uganda, went to Guatemala, and many other places. And really what I was doing is just trying to kind of cover what was happening on the ground and try to figure out what problems we had as humanity. What then happened is I got very frustrated with what was happening and what could be done. And I felt like we must have better tools of solving problems, and we must have better ways of doing things in the world. So I actually went into tech after that. So my next kind of chapter was that I started a few different companies. I started an interactive video company where essentially you could make this kind of documentaries and tell these type of stories with context. You could actually say more about what's happening. You could try to get people to take action. That was the idea, that you could kind of click things and find out more. And we ended up building a pretty good company. Worked with companies like a lot of different Virgin companies, Virgin Media, Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Media Business, a few other ones. Worked with BT, worked with Al Jazeera, did some stuff with Sky News, etc. So really we built a B2B SaaS platform where you were able to add interactive elements on top. That journey took us to Silicon Valley, which is where that kind of really startup picture is from that you can see here. And went through an accelerator there, raised some money. The middle picture is Richard Branson, who first kind of was the one to give us an amazing, as you can see, £750 check to really build this. This was back in the day, it was more about the publicity than it was about the money, if that's not clear. But it gave us a good boost because a lot of people believed in us and thought that we had something. Built that company. It didn't really go anywhere, mainly because we didn't really want to do just interactive adverts, which was a lot what people wanted. There was some issues with platform, some issues with where the market was heading, how internet was changing, etc. We then started a different company, Maven, which was more about helping video creators get paid for their videos by using similar technology. Again, that didn't, I mean, we raised some money, did some stuff, but 2-3 years in, it didn't really go anywhere further than that either. I then ended up starting a few different accelerators. So I went to Open Data Institute in London, started an kind of Horizon 2020 EU project called Data Pitch, which was an accelerator essentially trying to get corporates to work together with startups. And then I later moved to Sweden, which is where I'm still living today, and started Fast Track Malmö together with one of my co-founders now that I've actually started this fund with as well. So essentially, I wanted to be on the enabling side after my time. So my main, I could have said that earlier, but a lot of my career has been spent in London. I was there for about 12 years. I was in Berlin for a few years. I was in Silicon Valley for a few years, and now I've been in Sweden for 3 years. And one of the main things I noticed is that the help we got in Silicon Valley within the first 6 months was much more than I had received in London or in Berlin for the past 2-3 years. So I felt like they were so ahead of it and they knew so much more. And I wanted to be part of kind of help enabling that European ecosystem. And of course, all of this kind of came with trying to solve the type of problems I'd seen in the ground, but trying to figure out how do you do that with technology and try to help enable other people to do so. So from then on, after kind of having to run the accelerator Fast Track Malmö, we started a microfund together with my co-founder Joe, and that was now about 3 years ago. And to actually, we raised money from local angels from state-owned VC, and we wanted to just help fund the accelerator companies. But then from there on, we thought, why don't we just go all in on this investment thing and just see if we could just build a bigger fund? So we got together with another friend, Hampus, and the three of us just 2 years ago now started thinking about fundraising a fund. And this fund then became Pale Blue Dot. And Pale Blue Dot was something we fundraised very quickly. In about 6 months, we actually managed to get together our minimum target, which was a 40 million euro fund. And by the time we actually closed the fund, which took a lot of time to get the paperwork done, we had 53 million euros together. So in 2020, in June, we launched Pale Blue Dot. So Pale Blue Dot is essentially a early stage climate tech fund. We invest in Europe and US in startups that do anything in climate tech. For us, climate tech is very, very wide concept. We see climate tech startups in every sector. So it could be fintech, it could be food and agriculture, it can be mobility, transport, it can be fashion, supply chain, etc. And really the important thing is for us, climate tech wasn't the sector itself, it's more horizontal. And the tickets that we do are between 200,000 euros and 2 million euros. Our sweet spot is the lead seed round, so often around 1 million euros. And our goal is to get to 10% ownership. And the idea is we have a 10-year fund. We've now been operating for 1.5 years. So we could have mentioned that as well. We did our second close earlier this year. So we closed at 87 million euros for the full fund. And we're going to do probably about 30 to 35 portfolio companies. Out of those, we have so far done 15 companies to date. Some of them have been pre-seed, some of them have been seed. But many of them are doing very, very well at the moment. And like I said, it's really wide what we invest in. We have everything from, we have a company that essentially has a shared subscription closet where you get to kind of share clothing rental. We have a company that uses satellite imagery to measure trees, to sell that to utilities so they can prevent forest fires. We have one company that can edit traits in vegetables to make sure that they can be picked by robots, for example, and make sure that they can get cold store, etc. So it's kind of like GMO, but it's not actually GMO, but it's just editing small traits in vegetables, etc. So it's really wide what we do, and this has been a bit of a challenge, to be honest, to some extent for us to try to figure out what is climate tech. And that's why I want to really talk about a little bit about now in terms of how do we define this and how have we tried so far to kind of build our name in climate tech, but at the same time say, what do we think is climate tech? So I'm going to go to essentially the description that we have given to climate tech and give you a bit of context on that. So for us, we say climate tech startups are highly scalable tech companies with a positive climate impact. ClimateTech is not a vertical, but an aperture that we use to look at companies across verticals. Companies with a positive climate impact can be found across all sectors. And now I mentioned this earlier, but I think the really important thing here is that this is not clean tech. And a lot of people tend to think that, oh, but remember what happened in the clean tech bubble, remember what happened with all of these companies, all the money that was lost by all these VCs. And the thing is, that was very different because that was mainly energy, mainly renewable energies or materials. And those are the things that we still don't really invest in, because for us, we're very generic VC in many ways. We look at mainly software companies. We can do some hardware and some hard tech, but we have a 10-year-old fund, which means that there's a restriction on how long it can take for the company to mature or to commercialize what they're actually building. So we are very much more like a generic VC, but that look at climate impact as an additional criteria to all of the other things that a generic VC would look at, rather than being a whole different sector, looking at clean tech investments or looking at renewable energies and trying to figure out kind of how to kind of power the future with green energy. We want to enable all that. We want to enable the movement towards being climate positive. But as I said, it's very different. And it's and we kind of when we started the fund, we thought that we would kind of get to be part of defining this. But since then, climate tech has grown a lot, and there's been a lot of movement, a lot of people defining it as well. So I mentioned this a bit. So climate tech is not the same as clean tech, not for us at least. We define it very, very differently. For us, we invest in VC fundable companies. So we want them to be able to hit 100 million ARR, so 100 million annual recurring revenue within 10 years. That's kind of an idea of how big they have to be able to go, and they have to be able to hit essentially $1 billion valuation. Like I said, it's not a sector, but we can find them across all sectors. But the main thing is that climate is core to the company. So it has to be a given that it has a positive climate impact. What we don't do is invest in companies that do X and then they donate this amount, or you buy one and then you give one away, or anything like that, any kind of social enterprise models, etc. It has to be that I am in some way enabling decarbonization. I'm helping people reduce, reverse the kind of trajectory of climate change, or help prepare for a new world. The other thing is important to mention is also what it is not, is that we don't actually have a kind of measurement targets where we say that you can only apply to us if you can make sure that you can remove X amount of CO2 from the atmosphere or anything similar. For us, we do climate KPIs, and I'll speak a little bit about them later as well, but we figure out what the KPIs are for each company individually. So it's not something that we have like a criteria for people to apply, but we're happy for you to suggest why you're a kind of climate tech company, and then we will look at whether we agree. So why did we do climate tech in the first place? Especially at a time that climate tech wasn't so hyped as it is at the moment. At the moment, it feels like everyone understands why every VC is kind of starting a climate tech department or hiring someone to do climate tech. But when we started 2 years ago, it really wasn't that clear. So we were a bit ahead of the curve, but these are the reasons we started it. I need to have a little bit of drink break, but feel free to ask any questions if you have any so far. So one of them was that there's been a lot of more kind of demand from consumers for more sustainable products. And people have been asking for this. So we knew that there was a movement where people were moving more towards this. And that was really an important aspect, that it was something that, 5 years before, people weren't really aware, people weren't really asking for it. But we had seen that there had been a really big race in the kind of consumer awareness, and that was going to be really important. The other really huge thing is regulations. We had a lot of countries start saying at that time that we're going to go net zero by 2030 or by 2050. And this was also new. It wasn't something that we had seen the years before. These goals really started seriously kind of coming up around that time. So we kind of felt like, more like if there's all these regulations, if everyone's going to have to change, there's going to be money put into the sector, because how else are we going to be able to reach them? And then, of course, there were companies such as Amazon, such as Maersk, etc., that actually took these pledges as well and said that they were going to be carbon neutral by X time. And then we also saw a movement where a lot of founders who had started companies before said that the next thing they're going to do is in climate. Like I said, climate tech wasn't really a term that was being used at the time, but a lot of people were saying that they wanted to do something positive for the climate, positive for the environment. So we were kind of trying to figure out what to do. And we realized all of these things actually coming together, that this is probably going to be huge. This is probably going to be a space that everyone's going to invest in the future, because it's going to be big out of necessity, as in we have to solve these problems. Regulations are going to be pushing for it. Companies are pushing it. They have no idea how to solve the problems they have in-house. And there's the demand from consumers, and the founders kind of willing to do it. So we thought that that was a good time to start it. And we proved to be right, in the sense that just like a year later, there was like a big report by PwC where they said that that year 32 billion USD had been raised, and ClimateTech was growing 3 times faster than AI ever had. And I mean, I don't know if you remember, for those who knew, but AI was growing super quickly. At one point, everything was AI, AI, AI. So it was a crazy thing that ClimateTech had kind of reached that kind of growth. And as I mentioned earlier, at this time, it is very clear that everyone wants to do climate tech, and all the generalist funds are having someone who's spending more time on climate tech and figuring out how they can do this space. And it's also, I think it's becoming more clear to everyone that it's not just clean tech. We're kind of moving beyond the conversation that we started with a few years ago, and people are realizing that it really is wider, and it's a quite big opportunity. So that's kind of more like why we're doing climate and what climate tech means to us. And then I was going to move to how we actually make investments and how we're different. But yeah, feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. I feel a little bit like I'm talking to a wall or to a camera, which I guess I am, but very welcome to take any questions at this time.
I have a question about your definition of climate tech and how you came to it.
Yes.
Because as you said, you're a little bit ahead of the curve, but how did you come to what the three of you decided was going to be your definition of climate tech and what you're investing in? And did you then change it at all?
Sure.
In hindsight, as the market kind of grew, and other people came up with their own opinions.
No, exactly. It's a great question. The way we came to it is really that we tried to figure out, what the climate tech means to us and what kind of fund we want to do, and we wanted to be part of defining it. So it really was just us thinking that how do you create a VC fundable cases in climate, essentially, because this is the bit that was really missing from clean tech. Saying that, it was an interesting thing, though. We found some research saying that in clean tech, the only thing that actually performed well during the whole clean tech bubble was actually software. So there was a part of clean tech that was successful, and that is the part that, that's the kind of best part of clean tech that we can take out and put into climate tech and say that is climate tech. But it's not all of those huge factories, etc., which aren't completely VC fundable because of the high capex, because of the timeline, etc. And we kind of felt like if we're going to use this in the VC world, we have to redefine it. But saying that, now there are other definitions out there, and we haven't gone back and changed our one, because this is still how we define and what we invest in. But it is a little bit like foggier, and we have to kind of figure out that some people still use it interchangeably, and we get invited to loads of clean tech or green tech panels, and sometimes we notice that, okay, this is not at all what we do, which is why I always try to point out that we're more like a generalist fund. But like I said earlier, it is still a bit of a challenge because you try to separate yourself from that part, but you need everyone to define it the same. But when it's a new term, it's a little bit hard to get people to do that as well. So,
and within the world of random definitions that people sort of use slightly differently, depending, how would you put yourself and your definition of climate tech and what you do against, for example, an impact fund? Would you say you're a certain type of impact fund? Would you say impact is something slightly different?
Yeah.
What would be the difference, if it is one?
It's a great question. I'm a bit negative on using the word impact or impact fund itself, just because I feel like my expectations are that all the companies in the future should be impact companies. And every company has an impact, whether it's positive or negative or neutral. Every company has some kind of impact. And I don't think it's useful to say that we have expectations that 10% of the companies are impact companies, or 10% of VCs do impact investing, and everyone else, we don't care about who they invest in. We don't care about like what they do to the planet and to humanity. So I feel like it's a bit and almost irresponsible to make it a separate sector from everything else. So that's, I think, the problem I have with the impact space in general. But if you look at it as in positive impact sustainability, then of course I would say ClimateTech is a part of that, because every company we have will have to have a positive impact on the environment and positive impact on the planet. So you can classify it as an impact VC for sure, but we don't use the term ourselves. We just use the term ClimateTech, and yeah, I would love for us to just have the expectations that shouldn't everyone have a positive impact. So that's just a personal note on why I stay away from that term.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and yeah, at least one comment saying they agree, so that's good.
Good. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about how we make investments as well. So I'm going to be super transparent. We've been around for a year and a half. A lot of things will change, but this is essentially what it looks like right now. We actually get a lot of our deal from the network at the moment, which is good, but also not exactly what we want. And I'll tell you more about that after. So essentially, we get a lot of deal flow from other VCs. Also, I think it's also because we're specifically a ClimateTech VC. A lot of other VCs who aren't so into ClimateTech choose to add us into the round or see if we're interested, because it's like a company that they're looking at in that space specifically. But so much of it comes from a network. So as mentioned, I have run startups myself. Both my co-founders have also run startups and accelerators, have been in angel investing, run other startup programs. So we've all been in this kind of startup bubble in different countries around Europe and US for the past 10 years. So now that people know we're doing a ClimateTech fund, a lot of our deal flow comes from there. Some deal flow we get from our cold deal flow channel, and essentially what we did is just set up a type form on our website where anyone can just apply to us. And this is something that we really want to encourage. However, we haven't been so great at building a brand, which you might see with this kind of crappy branding of this presentation. We're doing a new brand right now, but we haven't been so good at that. So I think we haven't still built out our brand as well as we want to. And we really want to be the ClimateTech Fund of Europe, but we really haven't gotten there branding wise yet. But we get a certain amount from cold deal flow, but that's something we want to increase. And the reason we want to increase that is because we don't like that VC and startups is such a bubble and you have to know someone to kind of get an intro. We really love that people can just contact us directly. All of our emails are on our website. Anyone can email us, and we really try to be really open to taking calls. The other thing to mention that's not in this presentation is that all three of us GPs, we're the only three taking investment meetings, which means that we see there's always a GP that will review every pitch deck that comes in. And we will all have seen them and decided which ones we take forward. So there's no kind of hierarchy, and there's no kind of idea that, you get left with someone lower in the hierarchy and you never kind of get to speak to the decision makers. But in this instance, you might not get to speak to them, but you definitely get to be seen by them. And it's all about how the deck and how the email or type form is presented. Then we get a certain amount of deal from accelerators as well. So from demo days, etc. And then we have office hours. So we have actually their diversity office hours. So we only kind of reserve them for people who are underrepresented in tech in some way. But there you can always book us on Thursdays. And it kind of automatically chooses one of us, GPs, for that. But that's something that we've been doing for a while as well. And then to be transparent, so the way our current portfolio looks, 11 out of the ones we've done so far has come from our network. So like I said, that is definitely the biggest place where we get a deal flow from. We've had 2 come from cold deal flow, one from the kind of type form itself. One actually came from LinkedIn, just a cold outreach. One came from the office hours that we did. So there's one company that actually came on an office hour and pitched there. And then we have 2 that were targeted by us. And what I mean by that is that, we've kind of formed a thesis and said, for example, that we're going to look at all of the companies in fashion rental space. And then we literally talked to everyone we could find in that space, and then eventually ended up investing. So that's also another way that we've been approaching deal flow. And like I said, at the moment, I'm not proud of these numbers. It's very skewed towards network. but we're kind of improving the other ones and trying to figure out how to get better at that. Saying that, we do get pretty good deal flow, so we're happy with that. It's just that it could be divided in a better way, just to make sure that we see also more deals from underrepresented groups. And I'm not going to go into our investment process in full because it's very long, but I'm going to give you a kind of quick idea of how it works. The way it works is that this, like I said, is 3 GPs. We see all of the decks, we share them all in a Slack channel, and then we kind of vote whether we want to kind of take it forward, whether we're excited enough about them or not. Then that person, that partner, will then kind of spend time with that company and on that specific deck. Then we, if we're interested, we bring in a second partner and we kind of go into fund engage, and there's 2 people spending time on the company. And then from there on, we have a pre-decision meeting where we decide whether we think we're going to take it forward. We actually vote as a majority. So we kind of have hell yes, yes, no, and hell no as a vote. And you need at least 1 hell yes. So there needs to be 1 partner who's willing to lead the deal. And then there needs to be at least 1 yes, which is I support the deal even if I don't want to lead it. And there can't be any vetoes. And then we also have gold stars, which means you can push through the deal as long as there's no veto as well. So there's different ways of progressing. And this is also work in progress. I think all of these type of things are always changing as well. But then essentially we decide we want to invest. We go forward, we make a decision, we do a term sheet, we start due diligence. There's a lot of different parts for due diligence. And then there's all the kind of more boring stuff, like when agreements, etc., get signed. But then we have a few things that are a little bit different from our investment process. I'm going to spend a bit more time on them instead. You'll get this presentation after, so if you're intrigued, you can look into them further after that. But one of the things we do differently is we have an in-house researcher. We originally had an intern who was our research intern who helped us with climate tech research, and now we just hired someone to do this full time. And essentially, because we're a climate tech fund, one of the things we found that was really important is, of course, that we become experts in this. And as you heard from my background or my partner's backgrounds, none of us came from the climate background. We are all more startup founders, entrepreneurs who have done investing and accelerators, etc. And we've been in the scene, but we don't have any kind of climate specific background. So we wanted to make sure that we don't just do the research ourselves, but really surround ourselves with experts, or really make sure we take the time to really figure out, is this the best thing for the climate? So yeah, we had someone in-house who essentially would just we would say, hey, this week we're looking at food waste. And then they would spend a whole week just kind of summarizing everything in food waste and trying to figure out what's good and what's bad, what's actually better for climate, etc. And now we have a PhD who's a kind of climate researcher who's doing it for us. And in the way they work is both when we have a new project come in, we can say, hey, at the moment I'm looking at algae. Can you look at algae and what products there are made from algae, for example? And then they just research that a full week, and then we do kind of summary from that, rather than us spending the full week of just research, because we have to figure out all the other aspects of whether it's a great company as well, of course. And then sometimes it's also very thesis driven. So sometimes it's more that we say, you know what, I'm really interested about crypto and climate right now. Can you start a research project in crypto and climate? And then we go out, but we also find all the startups that does crypto climate, for example, and then we can start like targeting them. So there's a few different ways we work on that, but that is definitely very different from more traditional VCs that we have this part. And I think it's definitely been a huge win for us, also in terms of other VCs choosing us, because they realize, for example, how much work we have done on cement, for example, and we can share these deals, or we can share these databases with other VCs, and they've often found that, okay, they know what they're talking about and they know why they're doing this. And as an example, we had one point we were looking at seafood, and we were looking at lab-grown fish. But then we started thinking, is lab-grown fish better than just eating plant-based fish substitutes or fish alternatives? And then we realized, okay, no, it's not, because there's all these problems wrong with farming and fish farming or wild ocean fishing that's not great for the climate. And then we started looking more at plant-based ones. But then we realized, what's the best part of doing plant-based fish? And then we started looking at algae, which was seaweed, and realized that actually seaweed had better proteins. It has oceanic taste. It in many ways were much better than land grown crops because they, take a lot more space. They don't acidify oceans, and actually they sequester less carbon than seaweed does. So then I was really into seaweed, and then we actually ended up investing in a company that does a tuna out of seaweed, or a tuna alternative out of seaweed, which is now in stores in Germany. So if anyone's in Germany, they're called Better Fish. So that's also how we work sometimes. We really just deep dive, try to figure out, but is there a better thing? And that does mean that we sometimes reject or decline companies that are really great, but they are not climate enough. It's not the best thing for climate. So it's not always the most beneficial as a VC, but it's something that at least we'll be hopefully proud of in the future. The other things we do differently is we have an ESG scorecard, where we essentially try to figure out how good the company is on kind of different ESG aspects, and how much they think about different parts. And there's different parts of our ESG scorecard. We have an internal assessment that we do of the company. So we kind of score them ourselves when we are in the decision-making process. And in this one, we also ask things like environmental impact. We also ask, is climate change core, or is climate core to the company? It's not just a byproduct of what they do. What SDG are they following? There's a lot more questions than what you can see here. This is just like a screenshot. And we really try to make sure that we've kind of covered all different aspects. And there's a lot of climate stuff, but of course, there's also social and governance as well. And then we actually ask them. So part of the term sheet, we actually ask them to fill in the scorecard as well. And they have to have said how they feel about these issues. So it's a very qualitative approach of trying to see how they are aligned with these type of issues. But it's a very important part in our kind of decisions as well. And then we do some kind of the portfolio kind of scoring, and we ask portfolio a lot on this as well, and try to make sure that they're good. Then we also have another part of the term sheet, which is different than other VCs, which is a climate pledge. And this is actually the full pledge. So we have a climate pledge, which we ask all of the companies to take. It says in the term sheet again that they have to take it. So you have to do the climate pledge both on a personal level, but also on a startup level. So there's different actions that they have to take when we first invest, and that they have to take within 6 months and within a year. And honestly, we were a little bit worried at first, thinking that people are going to be scared off because it's something that they haven't really seen, to say, oh, you have to do an ESG assessment, you have to do a climate pledge, etc. But actually, the response has been really positive, and a lot of our companies have said, oh, can I ask my other VC to take this, who's kind of joining you in the round? And we're like, yeah, sure, do that. So it's been kind of putting more pressure on the other co-investors sometimes, which has been great. So it's actually worked surprisingly well, and we're happy that we started with them. So why do we win deals? One of them, like I said, is we realized this will definitely change, but so far we've been operating for 18 months almost, and we haven't lost a single deal where we put a term sheet forward. We have definitely declined deals where we thought the valuation is too high, or we thought that there was some other reason that we felt that we probably shouldn't move forward. But we've never put a term sheet and actually lost and had someone choose another term sheet over it. Although there have been multiple companies that have had competitive term sheets as well. So why we think we win is definitely one of them is the focus. I think it's because we take about 10% of the round, it's very easy to put us together with a generalist VC and say, I have this climate fund, which makes sure I stay climate aligned. And then I have more of a generalist VC, or more like a B2B SaaS VC, or more of a fintech VC, or whatever it is. And of course, because of us having those relationships with other VCs, it's worked for us to kind of get into these deals. So I think that's been really, really important. The other thing is that we are operators and we are entrepreneurs, and we try to help the companies as much as we can. We really try to just sit down and provide value. I'll go into that, what specifically we do with them, but we found that that's pretty rare as well. A lot of VCs are come from economics backgrounds, or come from management consultancy, etc. but actually very few are operators who have been entrepreneurs themselves. So the fact that our whole fund is made out of them has definitely made a difference. And then value alignment has been surprisingly important. I'm very happy to say that we've won a lot of deals because founders have felt that just by knowing Pelvidot and us, they found that we're more value aligned than a lot of the other VCs. So that's worked very well for us. And in terms of value creation, what do? We have these bi-weekly chats with all of our startups. I use Tuesdays as my portfolio days. So I speak to half of my portfolio every week, essentially, the other half the next Tuesday. So, and try to figure out what they need help with. A lot of it is fundraising, but some of it is recruitment, some of it is coaching, some of it is just helping out with finances. Some of it is trying to find a new client, like, okay, how can we get to ASOS? Like, let's try to figure out together a strategy or try to ping people together, etc. So it really, really varies. And I do different things with all of my companies. It really is based on what their needs are at the time. We have portfolio meetups that we do quarterly as well. And then we have kind of a platform with credits, resources, etc. And then additional to this, we've just hired a portfolio manager that essentially helps take care of our whole portfolio to make sure that she can cover the rest of the stuff that we as individual kind of leads or GPs I don't really have time with. So I know what all of I have 5 companies that I'm managing, and I know what all of them need all the time, but I don't know what Joel's or Hump's company needs. So there's someone who's always kind of trying to listen to what everyone needs and trying to figure out, should we set up a workshop on that, or should we have a meetup around this, or should we do some resources around this? So that's also been super helpful for us. Then how do we work on climate? I'm rushing through a bit. As you notice, I speak pretty quickly, and also because I'm talking to myself, I feel like I might as well keep going. But I only have a few slides left, and we can have some questions at the end. So how we work on climate, like I said, in-house research is a big part of it, and really make sure that we're building our own kind of Notion database and are aware. And we want to become much more proactive at this. We want to make sure that we have theses for more things in the future. So when we see a company, we already know, no, for example, no, we're not super excited about insects right now. We just think that there's better proteins for the climate. We don't actually need animal protein. There's so many good plant-based proteins such as seaweed. And we've kind of decided that that's not a field that we're interested in. We just don't think it makes sense right now. We could change our minds. We are super happy to change our minds if we find better research on it. But so far, this is kind of our stance on it. And we try to do that because it'll help us figure out what we're actually looking for and where we think we should spend our time. Also, we also try to be aware of regulations, for example. So if we know that, in Germany, you have to recycle your plastics and you can't buy virgin plastics after a while, that's going to make a huge difference in terms of investing in a recyclable plastic marketplace, which we have, and others. So this is also another way that we try to kind of stay updated and know what's happening within climate space. And then we have a network of people, of experts that we talk to. And this is essentially, a lot of it is our researcher who will kind of take over those. But at the moment, we have some professors who've done seaweed, or professors who have done direct air capture, et cetera, that we kind of set up like an advisory board at the beginning. We haven't used them as regularly as we thought, but the idea is to have those people around and be able to do due diligence on some companies that are a lot more complex when needed. And then, like I said, resources for startups. That's an important part of just saying we have this climate pledge, but how do I actually do it? How do I help reduce emissions within my company? How do I help offset, etc.? So it's still a work in progress, definitely, but we are building those resources and making sure we are useful on that front. But I also want to point out here that saying that, we are more like a generalist VC than this is like the extra stuff we do as a climate VC. But most of my time helping startups, it's not climate related at all. They all need help with the same stuff. I mean, they all need help with growth. They all need help with recruitment. They all need help with fundraising. They all need help with storytelling, etc. So, it's not so different than being at a generalist fund. It's just that there's this extra part that's kind of climate that we put on top of it. So my last slide, actually. So this is my own kind of reflections and kind of summarizing some of the things that I actually mentioned earlier that I just want to have a chance to mention, even if it's not is specific to this and to climate tech so much, is that these are actually things that we all as a fund do as well. But I felt like I didn't want to speak for everyone here, so I'm saying I instead. But one thing that we are very clear on is that we value startup experience a lot more than education. We don't really care that people went to this school or that school or have this degrees in economics or whatever. We think that if you work at a startup, at an early stage startup yourself, or if you've started a startup yourself, the amount you learn there will be so much more useful if you want to get into VC than anything else. So most people who approach me to say, how do I get into VC? I always say, well, go work for a startup first or start something first. Because I think that, of course, I'm biased and we're biased in our team, but we found that a lot of the best investors have entrepreneurial experience themselves, and they kind of have been part of the journey, and they really have a good understanding of what it's like building a company. And I think that's lacking in the space, sadly. And like I said, value startup experience more than investment experience. Again, I mean, you do get better at investing, but and you do learn a lot of things. But again, we think it's more important that you kind of know what the others are going through and what the other side is going through, because then you can pick the people better. You're better at helping them and kind of creating value for them as well. And it's such a big part of what we do is that value creation, to be honest. And then investing in early stage startup is more of an art than a science, for sure. Again, this kind of goes with if you have degrees in economics and you have been management consultants, you have done XYZ and have an MBA and all this stuff, maybe that will help prepare you for doing Series A, Series B, Series C investments, where it's a lot more metrics driven and people, have to have come to this and this and that. But at this early stage, I mean, we often invest in 1 to 5 people. Quite often it's 1 to 3 people that we invest in. And it's really about trying to figure out that, can they build something? Is there, of course, there's like, is there an opportunity here? What is the problem? What is the solution? But really, can this person build a team? Will we be proud of the team that they build and how they lead a team? Can they build a product? Do they take feedback? Are they resilient? Are they willing to put in the work it takes to build a startup? Like these are the most important questions that we try to determine when we make an investment. So it's so much about intuition and really just trying to read people than it is about kind of figuring out markets and numbers, because you can have the best idea, the best market opportunity, and the founders just aren't good enough. And we see that all the time. There's good founders, but they're not great. The other thing is empathy is largely lacking in VC. I think it's a huge issue. I don't know if you look at Twitter, what people say about VC, it's terrible. It's terrible. And it's terrible just talking to portfolio companies' experience that they've had with other VCs and things that are happening, that it's just not valued. It's still so metrics driven, and people are still talking about having certain goals, and the VC should do X, Y, Z, and startups should do X, Y, Z. And I think we need a lot more empathy, which also means we need a lot more different type of people to come into the scene. We can't just expect that the same type of people with the same type of mindset can be in VC. And sadly, so far, it largely has been like that. And then I mentioned this as well, due to Julie's question, but all profit in the future should be tied to impact. And in my opinion, we don't need to have the kind of impact thing anymore. We don't need a framework. We don't need to talk like that, because it should just be expected that every company that you ever invest in, you would consider what is the impact on the world. And it doesn't have to be that this is solving the biggest problem for humanity or for the planet, but there should be some kind of positive thing for someone. And it could just be a better HR tool because it makes it easier for this and it's easier to do this. Like, that's still a positive impact, even if it's not like positive in the sense of the world, but at least it's not a negative impact. And that's kind of the thing we need to get away from, because at the moment, a lot of the tech companies that have been built in Silicon Valley by people who have had similar educations and look the same have had a very negative impact on society. And that's something that we need to get away from. With those words, I'm going to end and see if we have any questions here, because we only have 10 minutes left.
We've got a few questions. If you've put a question in and you're happy to just speak out and ask your question, maybe put your hand up or something so I can see that you'd be fine for me to give you speaker abilities. And then the first person put their hand up. Okay, Bola came first. So you.
I'm going to remove my screen sharing now so that I can actually see what's happening here as well.
So Bodo, I'm letting you talk because you put your hand up first. Can
you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Great presentation, Heidi. Thank you so much for sharing that. I guess I just had a question in regards to how you research a space. So, for example, you mentioned the fashion retail space. Like using that as an example, what approach did you take to, one, learn a lot about the space, distill your thesis, and basically separate the you know, from the signal from the noise, because it's often quite loud, right, in terms of that? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks. That's a great question. So the fashion space, for example, was before we had kind of this PhD in house. So it was largely me and an intern working on that one. But what we actually did is that first we started by just reading everything we could, and there was a lot of, you know, there was a lot of question marks because there were a lot of things that someone was saying this, someone saying that, and we tried to figure out how big, you know, how high is the impact of the fashion space in general. We try to figure out what regulations there are, where things are moving. But then I did a lot of firsthand interviews. So I spoke to a lot of people, both at corporates and like in big fashion companies, and just interviewed a lot of people about what their challenges are and where the industry is moving. And then I literally went through all the startups I could find in the space and interviewed interviewed, or I spoke to every single one of them, more as a kind of pitch meeting, and really try to figure out where the issues are. But I think actually the most important thing in that specific piece of research was that I spoke to a lot of companies that had failed. I spoke to 3 companies in the kind of fashion rental space that had shut down, really tried to understand why they shut down and what went wrong, and what they couldn't get to work. And then I formed a kind of thesis that I started writing up about, actually in this instance, about why we shouldn't invest in this space. But then I came across one more company that I hadn't interviewed. I was already like really just saturated with like a whole market and felt like I'm so done with this space. And then I came across another company we hadn't spoken with. I took one call with them just to make sure I could kind of close the loop, and I would have spoken to everyone. And actually they ended up being completely different. They're not really even a rental company, had a completely different business model. And I felt like, oh my God, this actually will work. From everything I saw, this is exact opposite. And we ended up investing in that company. But this was a rare occasion where, you know, the research led me to think we shouldn't invest in this space. And then I found a company that, you know, made me believe that there is something that can work.
Thank you so much. That was super, super helpful.
Good, thanks.
We're going to put Shad up next. And then we've got one question from Andrew as well. So hopefully you can speak.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm not sure if you remember me, but I actually interviewed for the researcher role.
I do. Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's nice to talk to you again. I've been keeping in touch with Hampus, and you guys were a great help to me. I was wondering if you have seen any interesting companies at the intersection of crypto and climate, and what you think about that intersection in general.
Oh yeah. This is such a big topic at our office at the moment. I am pretty bullish that there are going to be some good use cases, and I haven't done enough research into it. We haven't done any research projects in house, but I'm pretty positive. I think that there's some stuff that's kind of a no-brainer and it's going to come, and we just need to figure out how this works together really well. I have spoken to some companies in the space that I think have some potential, but I'm not gonna, well, I also don't remember their names, but I'm not gonna name drop anyway. But my other 2 co-founders are very skeptical, and one of them has spent some time on trying to prove that they don't think this is going to happen. So we have very different opinions about this space at the moment. And like I said, this is more like, you know, sometimes kind of Friday night reading rather than us having kind of built a full thesis around this. And we actually literally yesterday we had an offsite and we discussed whether this is a thing that we should spend more time on and doing, you know, lunches around crypto and climate, or whether we should really focus on building our own thesis, because we do disagree a little bit at the moment where we think the opportunity is, and we haven't had a time to kind of formulate that. But yeah, it's so to answer your question, have I seen any startups? I think there's some stuff, but I haven't formulated enough of a thesis to be able to tell you whether I think for sure it's going to work. And I definitely can't speak on behalf of the fund because we're not sure.
That's fair. That's fair. I think I've seen a few companies. One of them is called Flow Carbon.
Okay.
And there's a lot of interesting stuff around integrating blockchain into how we verify offsets.
Yeah.
So I think that's cool, but
Yeah.
you know, it's just hard to see if like adoption happens because there's so many other offset options too.
For sure. I mean, one of the things I've been a bit excited about is kind of using blockchain for verification of land ownership or biodiversity ownership, for example, and whether there's certain things that can be tokenized there and stuff. But like I said, nothing that we've made an investment into yet, but I think there's some potential there.
Cool. Thank you so much, Heidi, and it's nice to see you again. Hopefully we can catch up again soon.
For sure. Sounds great.
Thanks. Andrew put a couple of questions in, but you haven't put your hand up, so I'm just going to ask them. First off, just a couple of questions about the diversity of office hours and actually how they're structured, and how do you, from my point of view as well, actually, how do you make that effective and make sure that you get the right founders that you want there? Because that's something that a lot of funds struggle with.
Yeah. So the diversity office hours, they're not super structured right now. We pretty much just have said, are you underrepresented in tech and do you want to speak to a VC? And honestly, sometimes it is a founder. Sometimes it is someone who just wants to talk to a VC and wants to have an idea of how we do selection, for example, or wants to understand how we feel about a certain space. And we're super open to that. And I think it's also like, it's not just about the kind of founders pitching to us. It's actually more rare the founders pitch to us. Sometimes there's a founder that does nothing to do with climate and they just say, can you give me feedback on my deck? Which is fine. I'm like, hey, we have these 25 minutes. Like I always say to them that you got 25 minutes, like you can use it however you like what is the most useful thing for you? And then, I'll spend that time. But then of course I won't have time often to go into afterwards and do a lot of things. But they're pretty unstructured. It, like I said, it automatically selects one of us depending on how our calendars look and who has meetings when. So you don't get to choose who you speak with. If you do have a specific person you want to speak with, then all of our emails are on the website and it's easiest to email us yourself. But then of course you have to see whether we have the time and schedule to do it or not. But yeah, super unstructured right now. How do we make sure that it's the right people? We don't, and I think that's okay. I think it's okay that we want to have people in tech who are also enablers and investors and in other parts of tech who also are from kind of underrepresented backgrounds. So it's good for us.
Great. And then Andrew had another question about ESG and how you do that. But Andrew, I hope it's okay. We've got 2 minutes left. So I'm going to ask if you could ask that question outside of this session, because we've got 2 minutes left, and Jemima is asking if there's any particular area that you think is super exciting at the moment.
I'm trying to figure out what my new thesis is, because I have now invested in all the things I was super excited about. I'm still excited about kind of fintech and climate. I think just figuring out how we change the whole financial industry to be climate positive, how where our retirement money is going, where our savings are going, how we invest, everything else, just as consumers, for example, that is still super exciting. And I think there's so much potential there, and people don't realize how much you could actually vote with your money if you had any transparency or any idea of how it was being used today. I'm still excited about seaweed. We made that one investment, as I mentioned, but I think there's so much more. I'm now speaking to companies that do dye through seaweed. They're doing materials. Some are doing carbon capture through seaweed and actually using that as carbon sinks. I think I love the ideas where there's, we can use natural resources in more efficient ways. Instead of just kind of building huge machines from sucking on carbon from the air, which is also great, but often not as VC fundable. But sometimes it's so much cheaper and so much more readily available if we can figure out land ownership and seaweed, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of what I'm excited about right now.
Okay, great, thank you. And we are now on the hour, so I'm going to let you go. So thank you so much for joining.
Right.
And yeah, hopefully speak to you soon.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.